Welcome to The Other Coast, a podcast dedicated to the Malifaux meta in Los Angeles. My name is Jeff, and with me here tonight is another player in SoCal meta, Colgan.
Hey everyone.
Hey Colgan. So today we are going to talk about Collodi, the evil dead man's hand puppet master from the Neverborn. So to start us off, why don't you tell us why some of these new players who are listening may not even be able to find Collodi in the app? Are we just crazy?
Yeah, so I guess we can start with what Dead Man's Hand is. So Dead Man's Hand are masters from 2E, I think only from 2E, that in the lore they've been either killed or removed or jailed or incapacitated in some way so that they're no longer active players in the current lore. And to reflect that, they've also been removed from the standard game. However, Weird didn't remove them entirely. They're still available to play, so they have rules, but they're considered to be in Dead Man's Hand. So unless your opponent agrees to it, or unless a tournament organizer agrees to allow them Dead Man's Hand in a tournament, by default, you are not allowed to play these masters. And also by default in the app, they are hidden. So you have to dig down into the settings and check a checkbox in order to include Dead Man Hand models in your search or to make the cards available in the app.
That's right. So, for those of you who are listening, I know our audience base includes a good chunk of newer players. So, if you have put Collodi into the search bar and you can't find him, go to your settings and enable displaying Dead Man's Hand. All right. So, with that taken care of, Colgan, who is Collodi? What kind of master is he?
So, as you mentioned, Collodi is kind of an evil puppet master of the Neverborn. This might be a little off topic, but one of the things that actually got me interested in him was his lore. So he was originally created by humans during the first time they entered Malifaux. And then after the rift was closed, he kind of went insane and got super depressed because he didn't have anyone to entertain, since he was originally created to entertain the humans that were living in Malifaux. And then after the rift opened up, he had kind of gone a little insane and was turning kids into little puppets to entertain people, or entertain himself, I guess. And because of that, his theme is kind of like that puppeteer, master of a puppet show. So he is essentially a support master, kind of similar to Zoraida, but he has a lot of offensive obeys and friendly obeys.
Yeah, his name Collodi, that's the name of the pen name of the man who wrote Pinocchio stories.
Oh.
Yeah, and like most of those 18th and 19th century stories, the characters are bigger dicks than you might think if you just went off Disney's telling of events. So yeah, he's definitely one of the more interesting characters. I think pretty iconic, probably right up there with Dreamer for people who played previous editions of Malifaux. But in 3rd edition, he has been kind of exiled to this Dead Man's Hand area, and so even if you've been playing for a while, you may not have seen him in 3rd edition yet. So what does he do in the game?
So in the game, he has a couple of things going for him. I guess the biggest thing, if you look at his actions, he has, I guess I would consider pretty much the strongest obey in the game. It is an attack action like all other obeys, and it has the standard obey subtext where it has to be a non-bonus action, it can't name a model or attach an upgrade, and it can't be a master. But it has a stat 6, it has no TN, and unlike most obeys, it deals 1, 2, or 4 damage to the target, and then you get an obey. So it's an obey that throws on some damage, and it's fairly reliable since you only need to win the opposing duel. And on a stat 6, you're more likely to win than not against most of the models you target.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's interesting that it doesn't have a target number or a suit requirement like, a lot of other obeys.
Right. Yeah, even I think with another one in Lynch's crew, Hungering Darkness, he has an obey which requires a suit, but it has a suit built into it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but not having a TN or not having a suit requirement makes it super reliable, and then dealing damage on top of it makes it, it's just like the cherry on top.
Right. So he's got this obey, which sounds like a pretty effective attack. If you use it on one of your own models, they would take point of damage, which, okay. maybe more, but relenting probably just 1 point of damage. And that sounds less than ideal, so can he do something to maybe not do that damage to his friend?
Yeah, so he has a tactical action obey, which is somewhat limited and that can only target friendly puppet models, but it's not limited in the fact that there is absolutely no test for it to go off, and it has no limitations on the action. So you can do bonus actions, you could make a master take another action if you have another friendly puppet master, or with some shenanigans later, you can just have Collodi take another action.
Right.
Which, again, yeah, like one of the best. He has pretty much the two best obeys in the game.
Yeah, in second edition Colette, which I played almost exclusively, her main thing was this action called Prompt, which could make other models take actions. Late in second, Weird ended up nerfing that slightly, even though Colette wasn't even close to the problem in the game. I mean, she wasn't even the problem master in Arcanist, because Sandeep did exist. And her prompt, you could pretty much target any model, or any friendly model. But it's interesting to me that for Collodi, they do make you target puppets. And so I guess the idea is to maybe kind of prevent some sort of Neverborn Super Friends list. But I do notice that if you target a minion, that minion gets a plus flip. And Puppet has some pretty gnarly minions. So why don't you tell us a little bit about his keyword?
Yeah, so Puppet in general is interesting since it spans so many factions, and you do have a lot of strong models within the Puppet keyword. So you have like the Corfi Duet, Hinamatsu, Vasilisa, Widow Weaver, everyone's favorite, Stitch Together. And then you also have, what is it? The Wicked Dolls, which are probably not seen as much, but they do have their corner use cases. I guess the most interesting thing and the thing to keep in mind is that since every faction has an effigy, you can hire those effigies in your crew, and if you attach the generic upgrade, I forget what it's called, but it allows you to upgrade your effigy into the emissary at the start of turn 3. You can effectively hire in any faction emissary into your crew if you're running Collodi as your master.
Oh, that's so. I mean, you can have the guild brutal emissary in a Collodi crew.
Yes, the possibilities are endless. Well, up to the number of effigies and emissaries.
Although since the emissaries themselves are not puppets, the only way to get that is to have the upgrade and convert them on turn 3.
Right.
What are his totems?
Oh yeah, his totems. So these are actually probably my favorite thing about Collodi. So Collodi's totems are marionettes, and to me, they're kind of just like the ultimate tar pit annoyance model. At their base, just like at the front of the card, they have armor 1 and 3 HP, which means they're going to require a full activation for most models to kill. And they have a melee range of 1 inch, so they're able to actually block off or jam up a lot of the enemy models. And you don't want to waste actions on them because Collodi has an action to summon 2 marionettes with a single action. So it's very action inefficient to kill them. Like, you're spending 1 activation to kill one of these guys. And Collodi could technically, I don't actually think there's a limit on it. Yeah, there's no 1-turn limit on it. So he could technically summon 6 in a turn, but since they're maxed out at 4, there's no reason to ever do that.
Right.
But he can completely replenish all of his marionettes in 2 actions. And it's a very low TN as well. All you need is like a 6 in your hand and you're able to summon 2 marionettes. But back to the marionettes, that ability from Collodi just kind of helps build into how annoying these guys are. They also have pack mentality, which gives them a +1 to their final duel totals for each other marionette in range within 3 inches of them. And since Collodi has Entourage on the front of his card, you're generally going to have the marionettes swarm pretty close around Collodi, so they're also going to be close to each other. So your stat duels are going to be quite a bit higher. In addition, they also have connected by string, which means when they're within 6 inches of Collodi, they also get a +1 to their final duel. So if you have your marionettes close together, you can get a potential of +4 to your duels. So if you look at the actions, like their basic melee attack, it's like a stat 4, which is kind of what you'd expect for like a throwaway totem model.
Right.
But then it can go up to a stat 8 just for existing near other models. And the craziest thing to me is the fact that they actually have a really good bonus action tied to them. So they're able to pass out distracted within a 4-inch pulse of them on a 13 willpower duel. And you think that like that's pretty good for a totem, and then you realize that you get 4 of them in the game. So during any single turn, you're just pulsing out tons of willpower duels to all the enemies like anywhere close to Collodi.
So Collodi sounds like he's a support master. What are some of his support effects that you enjoy?
Yeah, so in addition to, I guess, like his obeys, like you're either making the enemy do something they don't want to do, or you're giving extra actions to your like high cost puppet keyword models like the Korfu Duet or Hinamatsu. He also, in addition to having like the best obeys in the game, he also is able to attach upgrades at the start phase, which he has 3 upgrades: Action Scene, Love Scene, and Soliloquy. And they all have like extra actions and abilities they grant him, but for the most part you kind of ignore those because the actions on his base card are so good and the triggers are so good that I feel like it's kind of edge cases where you're actually attaching these upgrades for the abilities on them, except for Soliloquy. The main reason you're attaching them is for the free conditions you can pulse out at the start phase when you attach these upgrades. So action phase allows you to pulse out free focus to everyone within 6 inches of Collodi. So this is a great one to start with on turn 1, and pretty much the one I always start with on turn 1. Mm-hmm. And then Love Scene is kind of crazy in that any enemy models within 6 inches that are engaged by a friendly puppet model will gain slow, and there's no way to avoid it. They can't discard a card. There's no test. They just gain slow if they happen to be under assault by any marionettes that you have within 6 inches of Collodi, which, as I said before, is more likely to happen than not.
Right. Or any other puppets, right?
Yeah, any other puppets within 6 as well. Basically, you just have like infinite threat with like all your puppets and engaging the enemy models. Like you can pass out slow with like Vasilisa, you can just pass out stagger to them. Anyways, there's so many things that just kind of stack within a puppet keyword if you're running Collodi that it gets ridiculous really quickly. The last one, Soliloquy, which is actually really good by itself, but one I tend not to use because like if I can pulse out focus or if I can pulse out slow, those are the things I generally want to go for.
Right.
Soliloquy will pulse out distracted to all enemies within 6 inches, which is, fine. But in addition, this Soliloquy is probably the one you're going to be attaching for the actions on it, since you do get chatty and boring conversation, so if you're trying to protect a strategy marker or prevent the opponent from scheming, it can be really nice to just set up that little bubble and force them to discard cards for interactions and just test to do anything other than walking.
Right, and since boring conversation is a bonus action, and Collodi's bonus action is pretty decent, but boring conversation isn't going to compete with either the dancing on strings, the obey, the attack action obey, or the puppet master, the tactical action to kind of push your own models around. So if you don't need to give a friendly model shielded, which is what his bonus action does, it gives him shielded and staggered, then you can put up this boring conversation aura and just further gum up the works.
Yeah, this is another thing. Like, Collodi's bonus action is really good. The only thing kind of not great about it is it's only a 4-inch range. But even then, like, since you're able to target Collodi himself, it gets shielded to and staggered. So if there's no target in range that you really want to give it to, I pretty much just always give it to Collodi since stagger goes away at the end of the activation. So you're just sitting on shielded 2, if nothing else.
Right. What are Collodi's defenses?
His defenses are also like super good. I guess kind of what you'd expect. Well, not what you'd expect from a summoner, but he's sitting at armor 2, which is great. He's at 10 health, which is, a bit lower than other masters, but with armor 2, that isn't really a concern. And if the enemy tries to take you out by like charging him with something precise or something else that ignores armor, he just happens to have protected puppet, so you can just ditch some cards and throw those attacks onto the marionettes that you don't care about.
Right. And his bonus action to give shielded also has a trigger to heal, so he can heal himself. Now, I noticed, it might have been a slip, but I noticed that you mentioned his defenses aren't bad for a summoning master, and his only summoning action are the marionettes. So do you consider him a summoning master in your mind?
Yeah, I guess not in the traditional sense. I guess this is where it feels like splitting hairs. I guess, he's not a summoning master in this. He's not the summoning master in the sense that he doesn't really have a lot of variety in what he can summon. Mm-hmm. It's like just marionettes. But not that you asked that, I'm trying to think like how I'd actually classify it. Like, would he not be a summoning master?
Well, how often do you find yourself taking this summoning action, right? The fact that you know that you can summon these guys back, does that alter or inform the way you play the marionettes?
Oh yeah, they're just like little suicide balls for me. It makes it really easy to just sacrifice them or just toss them into things because their deaths don't really matter, you know? I'm not worried about like, oh, should I keep this marionette around or hold him back so he can interfere with the enemy's interact later in the game when I can just summon them back with a 6 in my hand. They have mindless, but there's a trigger on the summon them in, and you ignore the mindless for the turn. So you can generate so much AP with Collodi by just summoning back in the marionettes. And the thing is, like, even though I consider them just like throwaway models, like they have a slow trigger on their melee attack, and they're able to pulse out distracted. Like, they're decent threats in and of themselves, especially because the enemy just doesn't want to be like burning cards trying to dodge an attack from this little dinky marionette. But when it's threading slow on one of their models, they kind of have to.
Right. So, I noticed the upgrade action scene that pulses out focus, that has the 6-inch range, the other upgrades that, even though they apply deleterious effects, I think they apply them to models that are engaging a puppet within 6 inches of Collodi. Mm-hmm. And then Collodi also has that entourage ability that when he walks, puppets within 6 can take a little 2-inch move. So it's
just all models.
Oh, all models. Oh, yeah, that's right. Any friendly, unengaged models. So is he a bubble crew, or do you tend to find his crew spreading the field?
I generally, when I played him, they would generally spread out quite a bit. This is mainly because I feel like the Corfi Duet Hinamatsu are very self-sufficient models. So the only bubble I'd really have around Collodi would just be his marionettes. And that was also more to the fact, you get the bonus from being within 6, but that's not really a concern for the marionettes since I'm not throwing them out there to try and like kill high cost models. They're just there to eat up activations. So in that case, like I don't really care if they hit or not.
Right. And they're just effective enough to where an opponent can't simply ignore them.
Right. I mean, they're pulsing out distracted on like a very low TN duel, and if they're within like 6 of Collodi or just like near another marionette, like the difficulty of that TN goes down by so much.
Right. And then if you do kill them, of course, you're producing scrap, because they don't have an ability which stops them from dropping markers, do they?
They do not.
Yeah, so you're producing a lot of scrap, which, I figure is probably useful since this is a concert crew, and it's not uncommon for concert crews to have abilities to use scrap. So why don't we talk a little bit about this crew and the scrap markers that they may or may not be using. So for this crew, what are kind of the core models that you hire in?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the Corfi Duet and Hinamatsu, I feel like, are just kind of auto hires because they have so much mobility and so much offensive output and really good defenses with like armor 2 and decent health that I feel, they can kind of go into any strat or scheme, and they can either kill things that you want to be killed, or they can get enough distance to scheme or do whatever else you need to do with them. And they're very difficult to take out unless the enemy dedicates a lot of resources to them.
Mm-hmm. You can hire the duet, and you can actually still hire 2 Corfi. Have you ever hired Corfi individually when you have the duet?
I have not. I think the main reason is I just like doing the 4 AP trick with the Corfi Duet. Like having a stat 7 attack and having that much threat range on the Corfi Duet, I feel like is very valuable.
Yeah, I could see that. When you hire the duet, do you tend to hire it as one model, or do you hire in 2 Corfi?
I generally hire it in as a single model. I haven't really thought too much about hiring it as 2 different ones. I guess I generally would hire it in as the duet just because I didn't want to give out pass tokens. Yeah. And then it also allows you to get the 4 AP on the first activation, since you can't really do that if you have them as 2 Corfis, yeah?
Well, right, because you would have to use your bonus action to dance together, and then you couldn't use it to split apart.
Right, since one of the models would have activated at the end of that activation.
Right. Now, what you can do, though, if you hire them individually, is it lets you declare one of your Corfis for Vendetta, and since they're 6 stones, you can target a 6-stone model, and you can score it using the duet when they dance together.
Right.
So it can become, and of course it works the other way too, right? If you have your 2 Corfi and someone names one of your Corfi as a Vendetta target, if your Corfi are spending most of the game as the duet, it's a lot harder to bring the duet down than an individual Corvi itself.
Right.
Okay, so the duet and Hinamatsu. You know, Hinamatsu is an excellent model, and the duet are an incredibly lethal combination. So these are two really solid melee beaters. It sounds like you've kind of got damage pretty well covered. So, and that's 21 stone, so it's almost half your crew. So what else are you bringing in?
Yeah, so you were mentioning earlier about the scrap markers that the marionettes drop, and it's always nice to be able to use those resources, especially when it makes it even more annoying for your opponent, where it's like, okay, you can kill these dinky little totems that I can resummon, and you're not only wasting your actions and activations killing this model that can be summoned back so easily, but you're also giving me resources to summon in more models. So I feel like Vasilisa is pretty much an auto take as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things too is just her Tangled Threads ability. So when you're running like a puppet crew, all of a sudden, every time you're engaging or just close to the enemy, you're passing out staggered and just eating up so much more efficiency from them. So it's like now your marionettes, in addition to possibly passing out slow and distracted, are now also just like forcing staggered at the beginning of every turn.
And because Vasilisa is a summoner, she might be kind of part of the reason why you think of Collodi also as a summoner, right? Not so much because Collodi is necessarily what we might call one of these dedicated mainline summoners, but because he has other models around that can do it. Although Vasilisa is an enforcer, so her summons are a little less reliable, maybe, because she can't stone for the suit. Have you found that to be a real limiting factor in playing Vasilisa?
When I was playing Vasilisa, I was a little bit constricted by my model choices at the time. So the only thing I could summon in were Wicked Dolls. So, and also in order to like make it so I was not below the 40 point limit and just losing soul stones, I also had to hire in, I think, like 3 Wicked Dolls. So it was never too much of an issue for me. Since like, oh, with this action, I think, wait, Wicked Dolls are only 3 soul stones?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I needed like what was it?
A 6.
Yeah, I would need a 6 of masks in order to summon them. So more often than not, I guess the only issue was like, I don't really want to use like a higher card to summon in a Wicked Doll. It can definitely be a limiting factor, like you said, since you're pretty much relying on being able to get the like a high enough mask in your hand to summon in these models. But yeah, it never came up too often for me. To me, like, Vasilisa has so much utility even outside of the ability to like use scrap to summon models, that I feel like you have enough things to do with her that it's not going to be a huge issue if you're not able to secure that summon every single turn.
Gotcha. And I mean, his keyword has a henchman summoner anyways, so.
Right, and the Widow Weaver.
Right. So where does the Widow Weaver fall for you? Is she a core model, or are you pretty much done with your core crew after the duet Hinamatsu and Vasilisa?
That's more or less my core crew. I feel like the Widow Weaver, yeah, she doesn't bring in anything that you really need. Having, she has some mobility in her Seize Prey and the ability to create web markers, but I feel like if she's the only one that's able to create web markers, you're not really able to exploit that until later in the game. And with just the insane mobility that you have between like Entourage on Collodi and then the Corfi duet, Hinamatsu, and then the ability to pass out extra obeys with Puppet Master, that you're generally not hurting for mobility in the crew.
So what's interesting to me about that is, Widow Weaver is your henchman summoner, right? I mean, this is your reliable summoning vector to summon in puppets. Well, only Neverborn puppets. You can't summon Corfi or effigies or whatever. But by saying that Widow Weaver isn't, core, that she's not an auto-include, it sounds like what you're really saying is that Collodi can function perfectly well without summoning being his primary method of achieving his crew's goals.
Yeah, I think, with the support between like Vasilisa and Collodi, it's fairly difficult for the opponent to put out enough damage to kill either the Corfi duet or Hinamatsu efficiently, especially with the amount of mobility they have. It's hard to actually bring to bear that much force. I guess the main thing you're pretty much looking out for is just long-range models with armor piercing, which will bring down the efficiency of, or, basically just ignore a lot of the defensive abilities you have on your model, since you're mostly relying on armor for defense.
Got it. So your core crew then comes out at 29 stones, right? 12 for the duet, 9 for Hinamatsu, and 8 for Vasilisa. And of course, I mean, you're going to want a cache and maybe some upgrades. What might you fill those spots with?
I always feel like I want to get an emissary if I can, just because it's fun. It's like, oh, I can just bring in any emissary I want into any game. So I feel like it does give you quite a bit of flexibility in that case. So I'll usually be hiring in an effigy and then giving it the generic upgrade so I can turn it into an emissary later. And I feel like even if it doesn't end up doing that much, it is a lot of psychological pressure on your opponent, knowing that at the start of turn 3 that this little model is going to become a lot scarier.
Right. And also, if it's from another faction, I think it can present quite a mental challenge to your opponent, because it can lead to interactions that you normally wouldn't see. And even from an objective standpoint, that doesn't really do that much for your crew. In Malifaux, if you're able to increase the mental load on your opponent, it can lead to suboptimal plays.
Right. Yeah. It's like another unknown, and it gives you more flexibility. And yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like, the more decision making that you can force on the side of your opponent, I think the better off you are, because then they'll start making mistakes or they'll start missing things, and it becomes easier to kind of exploit that during the game.
So have you ever lived the dream and hired in the mysterious emissary and then brought in another, an effigy with the upgrade so that you'll have 2 emissaries?
That is definitely something to do in the future. But I mean, again, it's like there's a lot of fun things you can do, but me being constrained by like my model choices, like I haven't run Collodi much lately. I think I ran him way back at the beginning of January, I think, when we did like our like New Year, new crew thing.
Right.
And I think it was kind of fortunate I ran him now, because I'd feel really guilty running him now that I know as much as I do about the game, because like back then I was still like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and didn't really understand too much about the world of Malifaux. And like I was looking at Collodi's card, and like now that I look at it, I'm like, holy shit, like this is just like an insane amount of power to have like on a single model.
Right.
But like back then I was like, he might be strong. Like I really I had no idea like what power I was messing with at the time.
Okay, so you said you often hire in an effigy with the upgrade. In terms of his keyword models, are there any other models that you might hire in, just like situationally?
I mean, stitched together are great models. Like I feel like if you have a couple extra stones, like there's no reason really not to hire them in. Wicked Dolls I used extensively, again because of my model collection. I'm still kind of like on the fence about them. I think they can be nice, annoying little schemers, since they have stealth, which makes it really annoying to makes it so they can't be shot outside of 6 inches. Other than that, they don't have any defensive stuff, so they only have like health 3. So if an enemy does get in range to hit them, it's very easy to take them out. So if you're running schemes where you just need someone to run like the long end of the board, I think Wicked Dolls can be a decent choice. Like I wouldn't expect them to accomplish their mission, but since they're only 3 stones, they're either going to get you those victory points or draw attention or draw a model away from your other models.
Right.
Just kind of that distraction for your opponent.
Sure. So are there any keyword models that are just trash that you don't really consider?
I was looking through all the keyword models again, like kind of prepping for this episode. And I was looking at the Bunraku from 10 Thunders, and I just can't think of any reason why I'd want to take it. It's 6 soul stones, and it's just like the front of the card is very meh. Like it has armor 1, which I guess is okay. Like at this point, as far as like defensive things, it's kind of sitting in the same level as Stitch together. But then, it has less willpower. And then if you look at the back of the card, it's just everything's very unappealing. It has a very average attack, a melee attack, like 2, 3, 4 melee attack. It has a leer, which with Collodi, I feel like that's not something you're really worried about. Like on Collodi, you have his obey, which is better than a leer, and then you have a leer on Hinamatsu. So if you're trying to pull enemies out of position, you already have 2 great models to do that. I don't really think you need to stack your entire lineup with lures in order to kind of get that off.
Right. Yeah, the Bunraku, well, they have that defensive trigger disappear, which is it's actually one of those things that kind of annoys me because I think it's a spectacularly pointless trigger.
Mm-hmm.
You get +2 defense until the end of activation, but it only happens after the action, right? So if it had immediately, then it would be quite useful because it would raise your defense by 2 for that duel. But as it is written, it will only help you against a subsequent attack from this model's activation. So whenever I see disappear, to me that's just it's just a waste of ink.
Yeah, and I just realized for some reason I thought that it was like after it resolves you get +2 defense, but it's like only if you win. If you dodge the first attack, you get +2 defense.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that is so useless.
Yeah, it is really bad. I mean, I think if you win a duel because you have disappear up from the previous duel, like, congratulations, you have filled the unfillable Malifaux bingo card. Whereas if you get that spot on your bingo card, just like give up. That's a dead spot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, in addition to the Bunraku having just kind of mediocre actions, their defense, I mean, armor is nice, but disappear is just trash.
Right.
So, like a lot of support crews, especially the crews where the support abilities are dependent on the targets being keyworded, having, in this case, puppet keyword, frequently the dynamic is that disincentivizes out of keyword models because you're not getting the benefit from all these support abilities. Do you find that to be true, or are there out of keyword models that you do regularly bring in?
I don't think that's necessarily true in the case of Collodi, and I guess the reason I say that is just that, with the core crew that I kind of led, I feel like you have a lot of bases covered, so I feel like you have a lot of stones to play around with in order to hire like out of keyword things to kind of shore up some of the things you're slightly weaker at. So like even though you do get a lot of mobility and a lot of flexibility out of the Corfi, Duet, and Hinamatsu, in most cases you generally don't want them to be your main scheme runners. You want them out there like killing things or just denying points from your opponent or preventing them from entering certain parts of the board or accomplishing things.
Mm-hmm.
As far as out of keyword, one of the interesting things like I just noticed again in preparation for this episode is with the Changeling. So we were talking about how for Collodi's Puppet Master action, it doesn't actually have a duel associated with it. So you just pick a model or a friendly puppet model within 10 inches of him, and you're able to make them take another action, and that's it. So with the Changeling, since he has the Just Like You ability, and Collodi coincidentally costs more than the Changeling for some unknown reason, you can actually have the Changeling just hijack the Puppet Master ability and then even have Collodi take another action because, again, there's no limitation on who you can target with Puppet Master outside of it being a friendly puppet model. So you can like summon marionettes outside of your normal activation with Collodi, or you can just use it to basically turn a Changeling AP into like a Hinamatsu AP or a Corfi Duet AP. And on top of that, you're also able to, with Vasilisa, since Changeling is a minion, you can also use the pulling the strings action to just force another action out of the Changeling and get a card for it. And as long as you have a scheme marker around, you don't actually have to sacrifice the Changeling for it. And I feel like between Collodi's entourage and the fact that Changeling can only use Just Like You once per activation, that you're just using your second action to like drop another ski marker to get another AP out of the Changeling just from a bonus action from Vasilisa.
Right. Although the Changeling actually cannot summon marionettes because it lists a model by name.
Oh, no, but I mean, you can use Puppet Master to tell Collodi to summon the marionettes.
Oh, wow. Yes, you can, because Puppet Master does not have the standard prohibitions against attaching upgrades or, in this case, actions that name a model specifically. Wow, that's pretty sick. I had not really even thought about that.
So from this, we know that all Dead Man's Hand stuff is thoroughly tested.
Yeah. So Changeling definitely seems interesting, and of course, as you mentioned, the Puppet Master doesn't have any associated target number or duels, so even the fact that you are losing stat from the changeling, in this case, that's just irrelevant.
Yeah, it's just free AP transfer. Just like you doesn't have a test, Puppet Master doesn't have a test. Like, here you go, Collodi, have another action. Let's do another dangling on strings on some poor unfortunate soul.
Yeah, so I mean, geez, that does sound quite powerful, and I could definitely see including a changeling or maybe. Do you ever bring more than one?
You definitely could. I feel like just one is probably about as much as you need because, out of keyword, I think, it's 6 stones. So it is a little bit costly to bring in, I think, a changeling. I think with one, it's definitely worth it. Oh, I guess it's only 5 stones.
Yeah, it'd be 5 out of keyword.
So again, this is something that is purely theoretical for me at this point, and I don't think I'm not sure if I want to test it because I feel a little bit dirty playing Collodi, to be honest, after reviewing all this stuff. But I think if I do play him, I would probably just bring in multiple changelings just for maximum meme potential, and just see how much extra AP I can just toss around. Like, you can probably just get a full turn of enemy activations at this point with just all the free AP you can pulse out from just having these little hanger-on changelings.
Right. Would you ever consider the doppelganger?
I was looking at the doppelganger. I probably wouldn't take in the doppelganger. I was looking through and seeing if there was any interesting potential between the fact that Mimic is a stat 7 and you can pull in emissaries from basically any faction. But most of the emissaries being 10 points, their actions are already at stat 6. So increasing it 1 higher wasn't a huge bump. The only kind of interesting interaction I saw was between the doppelganger and the brutal effigy and emissary with the ability to bury on a stat 7. So it's all right, you're going stat 7 against most models who are size 2 or 3. Yeah. So that seems like it'd be pretty fun. But then I realized that the brutal emissary actually is a non-bow within if you're taking him into a Collodi crew because of all the obeys and stuff you're tossing around. So the brutal emissary, he has his crowd control ability, which is just enemy models within 6 cannot take actions unless it is their activation. So if the enemy happens to wander within 6 inches of the brutal emissary, which is probably not too unlikely since you generally want to be swinging and melee with him, all of a sudden your dangling on strings just kind of doesn't do anything. Which is very unfortunate.
Right. Yeah, I could definitely see that would complicate matters for trying to exploit enemy models hurting themselves. So, okay, it sounds like the doppelganger may be kind of a corner case or something that you might take to try out, but that changeling trick that you mentioned is frankly scary.
Yeah, I don't think the doppelganger would necessarily be bad. With Mimic, it's going to depend a lot on what your enemy brings as well. I was just basically looking at things I could bring in because I know I can control that. And again, it's been a lot of theory foing, looking back at Collodi, reminiscing about the good old days when I was so naive and innocent.
Yeah, naive and innocent. You still went on a reign of terror with Collodi. I don't think I ever played it, but I know Jim did, and I don't recall the exact stats, but I think as you kind of tore your way through the meta, Collodi ended up, I think, 6-0 or something crazy like that.
Yeah, I think that was my first win against Jim. I'm not sure if it counts, but
hey, you got to take him however you can get him, right?
Honestly, that was the first point where I was is Collodi overpowered?
So I think I know the answer to this question, but would you ever consider a second master with Collodi?
For me, I don't really think about second master hires too much, just in general. I like just focusing on a single master. So I haven't really thought about it too much, but just thinking about it, bringing in... I mean, I feel like Collodi is just, so good at what he does that you could bring in any second master and be fine with it. I think Collodi might actually work better as a second master since he doesn't actually have any limitations from not being the leader of the crew. You can still... Actually, wait. Totems can only be summoned in if you're the leader, right?
No.
Or is it only if the master?
Yeah, I think it's if you include the master.
Oh, yeah. Fuck yeah. So there's pretty much no limitation to having Collodi just as a second master in a crew. So I feel he might be a great second master because I feel just between him and his marionettes, he can cause enough havoc by himself. As far as second masters with him, I feel Zoraida would just be a fun pick just to have all the obeys.
You could then also include the voodoo puppet.
Oh, true, true. And then, yeah, I guess like Vasilisa, and if you take like Widow Weaver, you have two more summoning options now.
That's what this game needs, more summoning options. Okay, so that's his crew. It sounds pretty strong. When would you look to pick Collodi? Like, when is he the right choice in terms of schemes and strats and deployment?
Yeah, so again, I haven't played him into new GG1 stuff, but I feel like he's pretty strong into anything just with the amount of obeys he can pass out. Like, obeys are never bad. You know, with like corrupted ley lines, having a very reliable offensive obey to just move guys off of or move the enemy off of the ley lines to stop to deny points, or using Puppet Master to squeeze out a bit of extra movement from your guys to stay on point or move back on point if the opponent also happens to have a leer or a way of moving your guys off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the offensive potential of Hinamatsu and Korufi Duet in the same crew gives you a lot of threat when going into something like public enemies or recover evidence. And again, you know, like with the recover evidence, you don't have to worry too much about the retrieval of it because you have your 10-inch Puppet Master, which doesn't require a test, to just like have one of your guys pick it up. I feel like you could play him pretty effectively into any of these strategies and schemes. I think like more than anything, you just are going to be on the lookout for people that have ways of bypassing armor, since a lot of your survivability relies on the armor on the Hinamatsu, the Korufi Duet, and on Collodi himself.
Right, right. Does deployment zone really influence his pick at all, or does he have the mobility to play into any of them?
I feel like he has enough mobility. Like, you know, obviously he's not, I don't consider him like the most mobile master in the game, but I feel like between Entourage and again, all the obeys and just like the range of his actions, he usually has enough movement to get where he needs to be to start impacting the board, or at the very least getting other models where they need to be to start messing up with the opponent. So I don't feel like it would affect it too much. I think the bigger factor would be terrain, since you don't really have access to unimpeded. So even with like the high mobility of the Korufi Duet and Hinamatsu, if you're having to trudge through a lot of severe terrain, it's not going to help you that much, even if you're able to pulse out extra actions with your obeys.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that, another kind of feather in summoning's cap is that the models that you add through summoning, that they come along with your crew, right? In fact, frequently you can even position them within a certain number of inches, sometimes as much as up to 6 inches out. So even if you're playing in one of the more restricted deployment zones, if you've got a model like Vasilisa or the Widow Weaver, and you're summoning these additions to your crew, those additions, they're going to be right with you, right? And I mean, in some instances, they can even be out in front of your crew a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm actually not super sure what point I was trying to make here, I guess. It's just another thing that occurred to me. If you summon a model, it doesn't start in its deployment zone. It starts with the rest of your crew. And it's almost like those models got those walks for free.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things too, because I think, with like Vasilisa and Widow Weaver, I guess one of the drawbacks of their summoning is that they generally, they require a scrap marker in order to summon. In the case of Widow Weaver, she can also get stuffing tokens if things die, but either way, things need to be dying generally before you're able to summon in models. But having like marionettes, they're just like walking toolboxes, right? And you can reliably kill them if you want that scrap using pulling the strings. And the greatest thing about pulling the strings is that it doesn't kill them until the end phase. So you can get an extra activation out of your marionette, have it set up so that you're able to summon next turn, and it's still acting as a tar pit until the end of the turn. And now your enemy is even more screwed over if they need to kill it, because it's like, now I'm going to spend resources killing this thing that is going to die anyways. And it just feels so much worse.
Yeah, yeah. And Vasilisa, she's got that scoop up ability, so she can even bring the marionette with her and then pull the strings on it. And it's kind of like this little guided missile just right into wherever your enemy doesn't want to have to deal with a little attacking puppet. So we'll kind of get to his power level in a second, but what I'm hearing is that he has the tools to compete in pretty much any pool and any deployment zone.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to be like top level compared to some other masters into certain scheme pools, but I feel like he has the tools and flexibility enough to be viable into like any pool.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess where do you see him in terms of the power scale of the game? Is he top tier? Is he middle tier? I mean, of course, if he was generally available, is he kind of a trash master? I'm sure that's not the way it's gonna shake out, but yeah, just where do you see him on the power curve?
Yeah, I definitely see him as top tier, and I feel like a big part of that is just the marionettes. Because when I play with the marionettes, like after I kind of got a little more used to the crew, I was pretty much spreading them out as far as I could just to eat up as many actions from the enemy as possible. So, you're saying like with Scoop Up, you can move them around as well. Like with Entourage, they get a lot of movement, and you basically have these totem models that are so easy to summon back. So if they're out there gumming up things, and even if they get killed, or if suddenly Collodi is in danger and he needs them, he can just summon them right next to him if needed. And he's able to get rid of mindless and get that extra activations, and they're able to just eat up so much AP from the enemy that it's just becomes very draining, because there's really no good solution to killing the marionettes. Like the only thing that seems to make sense is like you need to kill Collodi first in order to stop that like marionette regeneration engine from like popping up every turn. But between protected and armor 2 and shielded, killing Collodi is not easy.
Right. Yeah, and puppet as a keyword, not even really considering Collodi, because you can play puppet as a keyword by either using Hinamatsu or the Widow Weaver as your leader. And this is kind of the one instance, I think, where henchmen leaders are more than just a gimmick. Most of the time when I see on a weird place or on the weird forums and someone's talking about, I want to use this henchman as a leader, like here's my kind of list, it's usually like, oh, okay, I mean, it's an affectation, it's like a little gimmick that you want to try, and it's usually not very good, but whatever, like you think it's cute, and so go ahead and play it and get your head kicked in. Or if you're the best, you're gonna win and beat the kind of the newer players in your meta. But puppet is a legitimately very strong keyword, partially because of just the wide range of options you have when you hire in it. If you have the Widow Weaver as your leader, you can also hire nightmare models, and that sounds a little sickening to combine. But when you take a strong keyword like puppet and then you add a strong master to it, like it sounds Collodi is, the combination can be pretty hard to deal with.
Yeah, most of the stuff about like, oh, you should hire in Corfi, Duet, and Hinamatsu, it's not because, like, oh man, with Collodi, they get this insane synergy. It's really just that Hinamatsu and Corfi Duet are like amazing models, and you should be taking them. And then with Collodi, since he's the Obey Master, like, oh, you can get even more AP out of these already like hyper efficient models.
Yeah. So you broke Collodi out almost a year ago now during our New Year, New Master little event that we ran. The idea was to play masters that you hadn't been playing the previous year and just kind of shake things up a little bit. Now that you have almost 12 months more experience under your belt, does Collodi seem stronger or weaker to you? Are there things that you have realized that you would do differently now? What's your current take on Collodi and compared to how you saw him?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I really didn't have a good reading of his power level when I first picked him up, just because I didn't have a strong understanding of the game. And like I think at that point I'd really only played with like Nelly and Bass. Mm-hmm. No one in our meta really played with Zoraida, so I didn't know too much about Obeys. Yeah, no Lucius or Zoraida, so Obey wasn't really something I'd come up against much in our meta. Mm-hmm. And also at that time, I think like our meta was still very small, so like just exposure in general was fairly limited.
Right.
But looking at him now, like, as I said before, I definitely think he's a top tier master. I think I can see a lot more combinations now, or just having a better model knowledge, I think, will always benefit you when you're playing with Obey Masters. I feel like my knowledge of positioning or what is effective use of AP or like effective use of my control hand, I see like all these possibilities and just see how oppressive Collodi is as a master, because, as I was saying, just between him and his marionettes, I think he's plenty strong. And then you throw in the strength of the puppet keyword, the ability to pass out staggered, and honestly, like probably the biggest hole in my gameplay, I think, when I was playing him back then, is just that I had a hard time keeping track of just all these negative conditions I was pulsing out to my opponent every single turn.
Yeah, you were just doing too many bad things to keep track of. I mean, that's I feel for you, dude.
I always forgot to pass out staggered, man. I always forgot the staggered.
It's a heavy burden there. So if someone were to put down Claudia on the other side of the table, what's the response? Or do you just auto lose to this horrific puppet?
Yeah, it's pretty rough. I think, I think the main things you have to remember is the highest value models are usually going to be Corfi, Duet, and Hinamatsu if he's running them. I guess if he's not running them, I'd be really interested to see what they do with the crew, and you might not have as much to worry about. But, you definitely want to bring ways of getting around armor, since if you're not able to get through armor, you're not going to be able to get in any significant damage, because just with Collodi alone, with his bonus action, he can heal 2 HP with the ram trigger, so you can easily just stone for that. So giving shielded 2 and healing back up most of the damage that you're going to be able to get through in a single activation against an armor 2 model if you have no way of ignoring it. And then you have Vasilisa there for some extra healing if you happen to need it. So I think you're generally you're looking at armor piercing if you have a way of like passing out slow or like staggered or somehow just reducing the efficiency of his models. But I do feel like it's going to be an uphill battle in a lot of cases, especially with Stitch Together being where they are and the ability to summon them back in with Vasilisa or the Widow Weaver, and just with how much of an AP drain the marionettes can be on your crew. So I think if you're playing against Collodi, your main things are you're trying to avoid combat as much as possible. I think there are very few crews which can really fight toe-to-toe with him if he's actually putting in his resources just between, the strength of the models he can bring into his crew and his ability to obey to get extra actions out of his models or obey and force your models into poor positioning. So you want to try and tie up Collodi if you can. You're probably not going to kill him between his ability to heal himself, give himself shielded, pass off attacks with protected, and also soul stones. Yeah, soul stones. He also has soul stones. I think it's very difficult, but you want to try and tie him down so he's not able to just get obeys on your more high value models. And you also probably want to get concealing if you can, just to reduce the efficiency and the effectiveness of his ranged abilities. Since outside of his ranged obeys, he only really has a 0-inch melee attack, which you generally don't want to be using with him. But yeah, so I guess in general, since I've been going on this little rant, you want to bring armor piercing to try and take out take out either Hinamatsu or the Corfi Duet. And you want to try and avoid direct contact with him as much as possible. Try to focus on scheming, since Collodi isn't quite as strong there, since he is really the only efficiency he has for scheming is being able to pass out extra AP in the form of obey actions to models that are already in position to score those schemes.
What about ping damage crews or condition damage crews and marker pyro marker type crews and like Raspi's ice pillars? A lot of people do kind of suggest those kinds of ping damage abilities against heavily armored crews, right? Like when they talk about maybe what you might do against a Hoffman or something. Do you think ping damage is useful against Collodi?
I think it can be, though I do think that within the crew, since you have a lot of access to healing and Collodi can just pass out shielded as a bonus action, since with that ping damage you generally want to focus it on one model, I think it can be very difficult to actually remove a model from ping damage from a Collodi crew, since they can heal him back up pretty quick and pass out shielded to effectively negating 2 instances of ping damage. And with how his crew works, with the 10-inch range on his obeys and just the mobility of Corfi Duet, Hinamatsu, and just their ability to act independently, I think it's fairly easy to spread out your models enough that you're not going to be eating too much damage from shockwaves or more, I guess, cost efficient ways of delivering ping damage.
Okay, I can see that. You did mention the marionettes, that they have this high annoyance factor, and you can, they have this recursion. You can just bring them back very efficiently. What about strategies based around gaining things from killing enemy models? Voracious rats to generate a bunch of rats, or soulstone cache. I do recall a game another player in our meta, and we mentioned this on the podcast previously, I think, but he said he was playing against your Hamlin, and he gave Soulstone Cash to his Ice Golem and just smashed rats and got a ton of Soulstones from it. Would something like that be a viable strategy?
I think it can definitely help. But again, you have control over whether or not you're summoning marionettes. And most of the time, if something's attacking a marionette, that's kind of what you want happening anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So if they do gain slight benefit off of it, I don't think it's really the largest concern to me if I'm playing Collodi. If you have like your Ice Golem and he's spending his activation smashing my marionette, do I really care? Like, I don't think so. Okay, like, sure, you get one soulstone off of that, but armor 1 and health 3, unless you already have that, let's see, I think with the Ice Golem, you would need to be within an Ice Pillar. You would need to have slow, and then you can hit for like min 5. Actually, no, he can hit min 4, so he could actually kill them kind of effectively, huh?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I guess even then, it's not too much of a concern, though, because, like, as I said, the marionettes are pretty much there to die, and they don't need to be grouped up together to be effective. So if the Ice Golem is going to spend an action killing a marionette, like, I'm fine with that. And even more up to that point, like, the marionette might have already passed out slow to him. Marionettes might have passed out distracted. So, like, even, that attack isn't a surefire thing if they're hitting with distracted. So I guess, like, getting some resources back from marionettes makes them slightly less good, but I don't think in most cases it'd be enough to deter me from just summoning more marionettes to eat up more activations.
How important is it for an opponent crew to bring a way to use scrap markers themselves, or to get rid of them?
I don't think it's that important, because if you have like Vasilisa, again, Vasilisa isn't a super reliable way to summon it, and you have pretty decent control of where you want that scrap to fall, and even if you don't get that scrap, I don't think you're too bothered by it within the crew itself, since the only models that can really use scrap are going to be your Widow Weaver and Vasilisa. Outside of that, your models don't really care about scrap. So removing it to make sure you can't summon in more, I think is fine. But again, I don't think that's going to be like the thing that breaks the camel's back when you're going against Collodi.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One thing I did notice, kind of looking at the puppet crew models while you were talking, because, I didn't really need to listen to you, was Vasilisa and Widow Weaver both have 6 willpower, but otherwise it's mostly 5s and in some cases 4s. Did you find terrifying to be much of an issue, or did you maybe not face it? And if you didn't have practical experience against terrifying, do you think that might be an effective defense?
I don't remember coming up against it too often, but yeah, it could definitely be an effective defense with like the, not having super high willpower on a lot of your models. But even then, I feel like, I guess I'm not sure where I'm going with there. Yes, I think it would probably be a fairly effective defense against most of the models.
Okay, you still have to deal with these puppets in your face, and as you mentioned when we talked about the upgrades Collodi gets, if you're engaging a puppet within 6 inches of Collodi when he chooses his upgrade during the start phase, he can just give you slow, and there's nothing you can even do about that. It just happens. So even if you can find a defense that the puppets have a hard time getting through, you still have to deal with these puppets existing. You can't just be like, oh, well, I have terrifying, so I'll just forget about it.
Right, yeah, and if there's like a terrifying model that's really like, oh no, he's a threat, then I just swarm them with marionettes, and then I call it good.
So, it sounds like a well-played Collodi crew would definitely present a challenge to pretty much any other crew, just because of what they can do, the efficiency, the support mechanics they have, the fact that they can summon, and even layered summoning, although that could become quite resource intensive at some point, since it's a henchman and an enforcer and not like a master and a henchman. Do you think he's just overpowered? Like, do you think it's wrong to play Collodi?
I'm not sure. Like, personally, I would feel a little bad running Collodi. I don't think you should feel bad. You know, I mean, obviously, since it's dead man hand, it's something your opponent has to agree to beforehand. So
Right.
if your opponent agrees to it, like, fucking go for it. Overall, I feel like it's just hard to give like a single answer. Like, oh, this is what you should do against Collodi. Like, this is the answer. This is the silver bullet. Maybe it exists and I'm just not seeing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, just overall, I feel like he has a lot of flexibility. Like, most of his power comes from the fact that he can just obey like anything in the game very reliably. So, you know, anything you bring against him, he can potentially use against you. And it's not like he's an easy target for anything in the game. If they can ignore his armor, he can use soul stones, or he has shielded. If they can ignore that, he can pass it off to the marionettes that are just sitting around him begging to be killed.
This is when you bring the 4 master list. The people are talking about maybe running against Zoraida back in GG1 when Zoraida was very strong. Yeah, maybe that's what you have to do against a Collodi. You bring 4 masters.
Yeah, maybe the 4 master list. Maybe that would work.
I guess this would be a good point to transition into the next topic, which really could be a whole episode on its own, and I mean, maybe it will be at one point. But briefly talking about the concept of Dead Man's Hand and whether you think groups should be allowing them into play. So I want to start with the preface that I have a personal subjective preference for options. Like, I'm the guy that when I play a game, I like to use all the options, even if objectively some of the options aren't really that good, or what they add to the game isn't worth the complication, right? I don't know how many of you have played the Battlestar Galactica board game out there, but I'm the guy who plays New Caprica, even though it's not really a good expansion. Although if you're one of the other 2 people who like New Caprica, let me know. I always want to use as many optional things as possible, but I understand that is just kind of like a personal bias that I have, and that's one of the reasons why I like allowing Dead Man's Hand.
I think I'm kind of in agreement with you. I like options, and personally, well, I have to preface this now. At least within the realm of Malifaux, I like playing against things that are considered strong or overpowered to see if I can find some kind of weakness. I had to preface that because I think after playing some 40k and then realizing that, in certain contexts, like, it's just, if there's no like interesting counterplay to things that are like overpowered, then it's actually not very interesting to me.
Right.
I would agree with you. I like seeing the options. I like seeing Dead Man's Hand out there. I completely understand people not wanting to play against it or not including it in tournaments, since like after playing with Collodi and I guess seeing Ramos, I can see it being a little bit crazy, and like there's definitely masters in Dead Man's Hand that I think are overtuned.
Mm-hmm.
So from a competitive standpoint, I can see leaving them out. From like a casual standpoint, I'm with you. Like, I want to see all this stuff. I want to see it hit the table. But I think it's just something you should talk over, because, if it just ends up to the point where it's like these abilities or these powers are just so far and away like stronger than anything else that it's just not interesting, then it might be something that you just leave out. Like, maybe you allow Dead Man's Hand, but you ban certain masters.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think other than Lilith, who I think Lilith is, she's okay, but I don't think she's particularly strong. Other than Lilith, I think the Dead Man's Hand masters would definitely be very competitive and maybe top tier, especially Collodi and Ramos. Nicodem is good, but I don't think he's the terror that he was in second. But I think if Collodi were generally available, he would be one of the best masters in the game.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things, I really like the fact that Dead Man's Hand is just an option, because as I said before, even if it sounds like justifying it, one of the main reasons that I really wanted to play Collodi is just I really liked his lore, and I really liked the look of his models, like Collodi himself, and then just him having like 4 very colorful, very unique marionettes running around was just such a cool idea to me. Mm-hmm. And it made me really sad that I didn't play during 2E when I could actually use him.
I mean, that's actually another reason why I support Dead Man's Hand, specifically in a game like Malifaux, where people can be brought to the game from love of one master, right? They love the look, they love the aesthetics, they love the lore. Having your favorite master invalidated can be enough to drive someone out of the game. And my feeling is that if you can retain a player by allowing them to still use their models, that's a win.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's nice to still have that option. Like, if Dead Man's Hand wasn't a thing, it would really have like sapped a lot of my motivation. I remember in order to get Collodi, I was like hunting around trying to find him, and eventually got like a tip from Jim that he was still at a store like an hour away. I ended up going there and picking him up, and it was just really nice having that crew and knowing that I actually had rules, and then could actually play him and see how he played on the table.
Right. Now, I mean, I agree that probably, a lot of people criticize Dead Man's Hand under this theory that they probably weren't tested as rigorously. And I mean, I could totally see that, right? Because they weren't expected to be played that often. So fewer people were going to test them. And we also saw that with the Bayou and Ten Thunders, where they were, kind of a less popular faction. And so they were tested less, and they ended up having several of the major issues when Third ended up going live. But I would like Weird to continue developing these Dead Man Hand models. I don't want a situation where Weird just marks a model Dead Man's Hand and is like, well, I mean, it's not really official. You guys can use them if you want, but we're just not really going to support them anymore. And I think with, again, the way people get attached to Masters, I think it might be a mistake in terms of player retention, but I also think it's just kind of a dick move to say, oh well, we're just gonna put the thing that you love in this box, and that's just where it's gonna stay forever. So I would like to see Weird, look at these Masters, maybe look at a balance pass, or even make a version that transitions out of Dead Man's Hand.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it would be cool to see a little bit more like balancing and stuff, and have Dead Man's Hand maybe be like a semi-viable option, or at least to the point where it's like, if you're asking if they want to play Dead Man's Hand, it doesn't come off as, I want to use this overpowered model so I can crush you.
So if you were on Weird's design staff and your boss had walked in and be like, Colgan, we want to move the Collodi to live, what are some changes that you might look at?
I would definitely start with looking at his obeys. Like dancing on a string. I think it's nice that he has a lot of power, because they want to make it very thematic. Like, he will be like one of, I guess, the obey masters, but in its current state, it's a bit too strong. I think having just the damage on it can be kind of a defining factor, but maybe add a TN to it, or I think maybe just adding a TN to it would probably be fine to put it a little more in line with other obey actions, because then at that point I feel like it's kind of at the level of a master obey, right? Like, it's not just you only need to beat the opponent. You need to actually hit a basic target number that's like pretty common for all the other obeys.
Mm-hmm.
And then, not needing a suit is fine, because I think among masters, like, anyone with an obey doesn't need a suit in order to get one of their actions off,
Right.
or at least their obey off. I think Puppet Master, you probably want to look at it just because there's that exploit between Collodi and the Changeling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could be fixed pretty easy. It's like, you just can't target Masters with this ability.
Right. Now, there is kind of this theory in design where you don't really want to hit what a model is good at. Okay, it's obey. I agree with you. Probably doesn't need a target number or whatever. And you didn't suggest things like, oh, well, let's just make Puppet Master once per activation or whatever, right? But that might be a way that some people would be tempted to go in order to kind of reduce the effectiveness of what Collodi is currently good at. But as I said, there is this theory that if you do that, you kind of attack what's distinctive about them. And so one way to balance models like Collodi are to hit other things, right? Maybe to reduce his armor to 1, or to take away protected, or give him something else that is like protected, but maybe you can only use it on marionettes, or it costs more to use, or something like that. Do you think any of those approaches would be an effective way to maybe balance Collodi?
Yeah, I think making it so Collodi is a little bit easier to kill, I think would be fine. Like, dropping him down to armor 1, since he can already like give himself shielded. I feel like in the case of Collodi, like, he gets his power from like so many different things that there would be a lot of potential ways to bring down his power level. Like, I think just bringing down his summoning thing to like only summoning 1 marionette, or just reducing the power of the marionettes in general, I think would be fine. You could make it so maybe they're like health 2 and armor 1, So, if you have a min 3 beater, you can actually take him out in a single action very reliably. But, that still gives them a decent amount of survivability against most models.
Even if that were the case, right? Like a min 3 beater could reliably kill them in one hit. If your min 3 beater is a 7 or an 8 or, even like a 10 stone Jonathan Riker type model, I think you're getting fair value from a marionette that you can just easily resummon.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't know, you might put more limitations on how you can actually resummon marionettes. Like maybe you could do something like with Reva, at the beginning of turn, he has to be within like 6 inches of a scrap marker, and then he can summon like one marionette back into play.
As an ability rather than an action.
Right. And then in that case, like mindless is still, maybe you take off mindless in that case. There's a lot of ways that I think you can play with in bringing down his power level without like removing his identity too much.
Right. What do you think of maybe hitting those upgrades he attaches? And one of the reasons why I suggest this is that I feel like those have a really high potential to just kind of catch out an opponent who otherwise has been playing a decent game and feels like they've got an okay grasp of what your models, Collodi's models are doing, but also keeping track of just these 3 upgrades that you can attach every turn. And now I find that, like half my crew is slow and there's nothing I can do about that. It has the potential for quite a negative experience.
Yeah, I agree. Now that you mentioned that, I think another thing you could play around with is maybe just moving some of his stronger actions or abilities onto his upgrades so they're not like always readily available. Pulsing out slow to anyone engaged within 6, I do think is a very feels bad thing since there's not anything you can really do to avoid it. So yeah, I mean, like you can like modify his upgrades, you can modify himself to make him a little bit weaker. You can drop the power of his marionettes. I think there's a lot of things to play around with. And like, as far as like what you should do, I feel like is kind of hard to say. Cause I'm not like, like at what point do you hit the tipping point where he's just like, oh, he's like a master that kind of has an obey.
Right.
And then he kind of like loses his uniqueness or his flavor.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I could see that. So, Collodi is of course Dead Man's Hand, but you could still play the puppet keyword without Dead Man's Hand. Did you enjoy your Puppet Master experience enough to consider playing them with Widow Weaver or Hinamatsu leader, or did you basically kind of get your fill of the bloody puppet show?
I wouldn't be too interested in it because, like, to me, running it with like Hinamatsu stuff, there isn't enough synergy in the crew to be like flavorful or interesting to me. So, I mean, if you run Hinamatsu, she doesn't have anything that really like helps other models with her. You're just able to pick a lot of these like very strong models to go with you, which is like great. But I think that was also one of the reasons why I kind of stopped playing Collodi as much, since it felt less like a combined crew and more like I have a bunch of strong models, deal with it kind of thing. So it didn't have like the kind of like synergistic kind of like janky combo potential that I really enjoy in crews. So I don't think I would be very tempted to run like a puppet keyword without Collodi.
Yeah, I gotcha. Although, I mean, I have to say that the idea of using the Widow Weaver and bringing in puppets and nightmares interests me, because I wonder if there's just like some sort of broken thing that you can do with that.
Oh yeah, that seems like it'd be a lot of fun.
But yeah, no, I mean, I kind of agree with you. And actually, outside the Crossroads 7, which I quite like playing, partially because I like all these sort of multi-faction things in the Friday Night Magic drafts that we do at the game store. Like, I draft 5 color, and I it's not good. It usually doesn't work. Although I've won a couple of draft nights, so it does work on occasion. But I like these kind of cross-faction type things, and so keywords like the puppet, I wouldn't want Weird to overdo it, because then the factions start to lose their identity. But I do like that they exist in the game. But where I was kind of going with this is that masters are very closely tied to my enjoyment in the game, right? Like, identify might be the wrong word, because I don't think, oh yeah, like I am Jackdaw, but I derive a lot of my enjoyment of the game from my master, from my master's activations and getting to use my master. And so that would be one reason why I personally wouldn't be as interested in a henchman-led crew, a henchman-led puppet crew, even one that, again, puppet crews are one of those few henchman-led crews that are, I think, really viable. But it just wouldn't appeal to me on that level.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I really like the uniqueness of the masters and like them having like their own aesthetic. They're having a totem that's really tied into the identity, and then playing with the henchman, it just kind of takes that all away. It's like, oh, you get this effigy, he'll hang around with you. And it's like, yeah, like effigies are better than some totems. Like some henchmens are like very strong, you know, like as leaders, like once you get them 3 AP, and like, you know, I was just saying, if you can run puppets, like you can build a very strong crew. But that doesn't really appeal to me as much, and like I'd feel very lost running a henchman crew, because it's just like I can't identify with it as much. It doesn't seem to have the same impact as running with a master.
Right. No, I'm right there with you. So, is there anything else about Collodi that you wanted to mention, or you know, would you recommend to our listeners that they go out and try to find a puppet crew?
Oh, 100%, definitely fine. If you can get Collodi, I'd say pick him up, just because his totems are so cool looking, and I like the sculpt of Collodi himself.
Yeah.
As far as like playing with them, like I don't know, if you have like someone you don't really like. I think that's fine. Or if they're running Dead Man's Hand stuff already, you might as well, you know, swing back.
Yeah. If they if you've got someone in your meta who is just always on top, and you're looking to take him down a peg, see if you can scrounge up a Collodi box. The second ed boxes, they can be harder to find and kind of expensive, but the first ed boxes, you know, they're metal, but they're not bad at all, and I think they can kind of be found a bit easier. Well, Colgan, thank you for taking us through Collodi. I do remember just how horrific it was to watch these games with him, so I'm really not sad that we don't see him that often. But maybe this episode will make you feel nostalgic and you'll break him out again, so we'll see. Who knows? For those of you who've listened, thank you very much. You know, we play down here in Los Angeles, which is just one small corner of the Malifaux world, but we want to be part of the wider discussion, and that's one reason we're doing this podcast. And if you've listened and you've enjoyed what we've said, you know, we would appreciate a like or a share or subscribe. If you think we said something stupid, you know, we love any feedback and email. We got some voicemails over the Anchor site, which were super cool. I mean, I didn't even know that was a thing, but we got them, and they were great to listen to. We do have a PayPal and a Patreon in the show notes if you want to support the channel in that regard. And Colgan is also still accepting donations of mole men for his 20 mole man crew. So if you have any mole men that you're not going to be using anytime soon, you can reach out to us and we'll find a way to get those to Colgan. Other than that, I think that's going to do it for tonight. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, everyone.